Good morning, afternoon, and evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to the second day of our panel. I welcome you all back and also to our guests today. Today's topic is going to be around the efficiencies of a programmatic advertising system, its sustainability, and overall impacts of what is pretty much going on within the market and as where we want to head. Today with us is Kara from GumGum. She has over 10 years of experience within this industry. Anik from DPG Media, which is one of Europe's biggest publishers, and Caroline from Sedara. Me, myself, I'm coming from the publishing side originally, a publisher in Germany operating this business and have been going through many challenges there. Nowadays, we pivoted to the direction of providing solutions around optimizing a publisher's advertising stack, as well as overall increasing the efficiencies within the market through data and machine learning around AI and so on. But I don't want to say any more about me or us. I want to give now the floor to Kara for a quick introduction. Thank you.
Awesome. First things first, thank you guys so much for having me on the panel today. And it's a pleasure to sit with you ladies and Nils and to have this discussion, which is an important one, obviously. But Carolyn Riley, and I'm the Director of Publisher Development for Sedara, which is the carbon intelligence platform. And I come from a unique background, but have worked closely with publishers over the last few years, always aiming to bring value to them in some capacity. And so what my role at Sedara means is that I spearhead the efforts towards getting publishers to onboard with Sedara and really spread the message on how and why sustainability within media is important and how we can collectively, as an industry, work together to achieve a lesser carbon footprint. So again, thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Carolyn, and then giving it to Anik.
Yeah, thank you, Niels. Yeah, also from my side, great to be here today. Thanks for the invite. I'm Anik, and I work at the DPG. I have a background in digital advertising for almost 12 years, strongly programmatic. I kicked off in the agency world, and then after 3 years, switched to the publisher side to give you a bit more perspective on DPG, because not everyone in the call might know the company. It's indeed a big publisher in Europe. We are active in Belgium, the Netherlands, and also in Denmark. And we have around 80 brands and 600 employees active in news media, magazines, audio, and TV. And within DPG Media, I'm responsible for everything involving ad ops, yields, and operations with respect to digital advertising. And I'm part of the digital management team. And in that matter, I'm also highly involved with respect to everything sustainable and efficient and rolling out our so-called unique trusted web strategy in Europe.
Thank you, Anik. So there was a small issue. Kara, with your introduction, the microphone was muted from our end. Would you mind repeating your introduction? Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. That's totally fine. Thanks, guys, for having me here. Super excited, along with all these ladies and Niels. So I'm Kara. I am our Senior Director of Platform Operations at GumGum, which is a way of saying that I oversee all of our programmatic partnerships from demand sources and DSPs down to third-party partners like Assertive Yield and Sedara. And at GumGum, we are identifying in this sense as an SSP. So yeah, excited to dive into the specifics here.
Thank you very much. It's exciting to have you all on this panel. Now, on today's topic in general, I want to take a small step back, cover a little bit on pretty much like understanding, because I think from the audience, we have people that are not very familiar with the entire topic yet. So when we look at the programmatic industry overall, it has developed from the waterfall model to the header bidding model to now multiple different layers of server-side bidding as well. And we went from a couple of requests being sent out for one ad impression to a partner to nowadays, in many cases, hundreds of requests going out. There are reasons from a publisher's perspective as to why sending more requests makes more money. And it is kind of rewarding for publishers. But on the other hand, of course, it is squeezing the entire market, and it is squeezing the margins, which are already quite slim on the SSP side, on the DSP side, and no one in the end is really winning, as all we do is inflate the industry, publishers trying to get more of pretty much like the cake of advertising spend, but this cake is limited. Sending more requests does not increase the amount of advertising spent within the market. And this has been an ongoing issue for a long time, especially also as the entire industry is under pressure, not just in terms of overall advertising spend decreasing or not keeping up with the inflation. And then, of course, parties are motivated to, let's increase the partners we are working with. Let's increase the paths for which we are working with those partners. And in the end, getting slight gains from that, but long-term possibly hurting their own inventory and hurting overall the entire market. When we look at nowadays performance, as AdMonsters has put it already 2 years ago, 90% of the bid requests are pretty much wasted. They don't even result in any bid responses. Now, if you take it one step further, even a bid response doesn't mean it would have any value if it doesn't win in the end. So while there are partners that are bidding a lot and heavily, if a majority of their bids is not actually winning any impression, the actual value they are driving is questionable, especially if this bid is far, far below the highest bids or the market value. If we look at the data we see within assertive yield, which is composed of many publishers, hundreds to thousands worldwide with different advertising stacks, different geolocations of traffic, we see that only around 2.5% of the bid requests from pre-bid itself actually result in an ad impression. Now, this number is actually pretty good in comparison to the 90% not having any bid responses available. But if we would now add on top open bidding, Amazon TAM, another solution, server-side solution, this number is dropping and dropping and dropping. So we are at the inflection point where for many DSPs, they have to put more and more pressure on SSPs in terms of reducing how many requests they're receiving. They have to increase the strength of QPS limitations, which is how many requests may I receive from a given partner in order to sustain that volume. And similar mechanisms are starting to appear within SSPs where they also have to make the decision, for this inventory, we can't run an auction. It becomes too expensive. So I would like to kick off by giving the floor to Kara. You're seeing it from your side, from the SSP's perspective. What has been your kind of perspective on the entire topic from the last couple of years, and what is your estimation into the future?
Yeah, definitely. I think to kind of level set a little bit, I think we believe that at the root of it, there's transparency really does mean like measuring, tracking, reporting on these insights. And today there's just a lot of opaqueness with data collection, how each technology is working. And I think it's time that we all kind of start to work together on the industry to figure out how exactly all these moving pieces can come together to serve ads. And for us, we made the conscious decision to really put sustainability and traffic shaping kind of at the forefront, and making sure that we're kind of operating under the current status quo of digital advertising, but also understand there's a ton of waste happening and there's a lot of ad spend and server energy that's going out. And we really need to button these up. I also think that there's really no standardized guidelines for traffic shaping either. That's kind of what our current solution is. And everyone more or less has their own tech and methodologies, whether that's a great service like assertive yield or an internal built system. Really, in order to drive more adoption and expand the importance of solving these, we need more standardization, and we need to lessen the barrier of entries that we currently have, right? Only people who can afford it or have the resources in-house to deal with these problems are able to right now. I think there's definitely maybe some in the future where we could have like an open source code or something that allows everybody in this space to be able to put efforts and resources behind this, and not just those that are currently big enough to help solve the problem.
Thank you. So it's a lot about being not just wanting to do something about it, about actually being capable of doing something.
Yeah.
So if we look at it from the publisher's perspective, there's always the question in the room, if as a publisher, I'm starting to apply certain filtering to requests I'm sending out, and I don't just mean like excluding certain countries where our partners definitely not operating. Does that cause any concerns on the SSP side? I mean, if the publisher is not very good at making these decisions, there's always a possibility of more demand being cut off, and also an uneven playing field between the different partners within the advertising stack having access to a different level of inventory being available, which of course can then impact the supply path optimization from the DSPs. What's your perspective there?
It's definitely a tricky situation. And I think that we have to support publishers in this initiative because I do feel like they often get the short end of the stick. And it shouldn't just be on them to reduce the waste and curb the emissions for the industry, but it also is hard to just constantly be relying on SSPs and DSPs to do this for them. So there are some new industry standards coming out and some encouraging new initiatives, like Trade Desk Global Placement ID is one of them that does help expose duplication and allow advanced targeting from the demand side within the supply chain. So there's definitely more of these like open requirements and things that we can be adopting together. But it definitely is a difficult line to balance that I think is why we're kind of striving that everyone should start to kind of collaborate and have commitment towards these. But I don't think there's any real clear-cut answer that we have yet within the industry.
Yeah, it's a challenging topic as to the reward is still there of sending more requests, and there's no solution to basically stopping that or solving it fully. Thank you, Kara. Caroline, from the perspective now, given like all of the movements, and it's still continuing the movements of the supply keeping even inflating further and further within the industry, although nowadays we really know that it shouldn't, and most people are aware of that. When you look at it from the measurement perspective, what kind of changes are you seeing, and also are you thinking there will be the cutoff point where it's starting to decrease again?
Yeah, so I think from Kara's perspective also is that there's like sort of a blame game that goes on, and who should be responsible for the lowering of emissions within our industry. And as she mentioned, you know, there are going to be guidelines coming out within the next couple of months that will really help shape sort of how we behave and tackle the initiatives with lowering your emissions. But the first step, which I think is really important to highlight, is just that a lot of publishers, and I will, you know, guard them as that's my sweet spot, but publishers in general are just not even measuring their carbon emissions data. And so I think that the initial phase here that we need to enter is just embarking on that journey, and having more publishers just sort of set the tone of where their benchmark lies, what their carbon emissions look like, and then, you know, taking a consultative approach on how, you know, we can help reduce the hops and make it a collective initiative among the industry. And I know obviously there's incentive to create the extra hops and get the higher CPMs and do all of that stuff, but at the end of the day, you can eliminate things without sacrificing revenue. And yeah, I think that's a big industry push that we all need to take into consideration.
Thank you. So it's a lot about increasing the basically transparency as to where are these emissions happening, to then understand really, does it make sense to act here, or where should I focus with my attention on improving things? Thank you.
Right.
So Anik, for DPG, it's like kind of like a very unique case. You have, you're one of the biggest publishers in Europe. And over the last years, you have really created your own, I would say, marketplace or your own strategy around the entire topic. And as a effect or part of it, it also comes with a lot of optimizations and efficiency gains and reduction of carbon emissions when you basically, sell your inventory. Do you want to go a bit into the details?
Yeah, of course, I can outline our strategy a bit. And let me just give the disclaimer that I think we are in the lucky position that we are having market dominance in Belgium and the Netherlands. So it also creates, of course, a lot of options with respect to pushing strategy and market. But I think you could maybe say that DPG has a pretty strong demand path optimization strategy. What we do, we really want to create our own ecosystem and become the local alternative for the globals, and also move away from the intransparent open web, in which we, of course, see that only, 51% of the dollar that goes in ends up at the publisher. And we also see the user and the advertiser hungering for more transparency and less vagueness. And how we do that basically is we want to solve the 4 top issues we see in markets for the buyer, from a buyer perspective. That's basically the signal loss coming up. It is the impact you can't create with the standard ads, we believe at least, but it's also the trust and transparency issue. And what we do, we build our own ecosystem in which we move away from open markets. So I think that is the pretty unique factor. To give you an idea, in the Netherlands, we currently only have one SSP live in the header. That's the only one. And we really focus on direct relationship with clients. So we have strong P&P IO relationships and also our own self-serve system pushed into markets. So part of our strategy is also that we build own platforms. So we have our own self-serve app manager, and combined with that, we have a data lab tool. You can onboard your CRM and make your own audiences and push them onto our network. And we also have a design studio in which advertisers can make their own so-called DPG seamless formats, which have a higher viewability and a better performance also on the more lower side of the market funnel. And we see this really pulling off. It's a successful strategy. We hope we can also inspire other publishers with it. But I'm also pretty aware of the fact that it's not for everyone because, we have the luck of the market dominance, as I already mentioned. And then advertisers also easily follow into a strategy. So I think that's a big disclaimer here.
Thank you, Anik. So it's a very unique case. And yeah, of course, the market position plays a big role in it being possible. We see similar strategies of one publisher or sales house operating on the Swiss market, some on the German market that are following similar patterns. I think you're quite ahead further like into the future there. But of course, this is only possible for the few very big players that have these advertising relationships already, that have majority of the market, so that it is simple for advertisers to basically spend the time on buying directly with you and so on. Now, if we look at the other publishers, the majority of publishers, which are of course not in this unique position, from the different strategies and the different angles you have been working on basically implementing yourself, is there something, any kind of part which you feel like could be relevant for those publishers as well?
Yeah, I think every publisher could actually do a lot that could be efficient and effective. I mean, I think 5 years ago we had 12 SSPs live, for example, and I don't think that's ever going to be effective. And I also don't think sending out more ad requests is always going to give you more revenue. So I would say you should really strongly focus on your vendor list and also which SSPs you have live, and be just critical there. Go for the correct data, put it in, and select 3 to 5, which really gives you incremental revenue, and also maybe have like specific supply paths you really want to follow. And I think you should also really try to get to know your customer, because I think it's also from the buy side sometimes pretty easy to just click on every SSP when setting up a campaign in a DSP, not really knowing what they're doing. So I think there's also a need on the buy side to get more clarity on how can you now best access the certain specific publisher network in the country. And next to that, I think it's very important for publishers these days to try to win the battle on quality and not on price. Because I think the price battle is something you're never going to win, because I think the big globals and also all the made for advertising sites popping up will always be better on that. But I think you should never forget what you really have at the core, and that is great brand safe content, which your competitors are never going to have, the big ones, I mean then. And I think you should try to pursue that and make every ad request count and send out less instead of more, but make more of less, I would say. To give you an example, also very practical, we have a fill rate in low demand season of maybe only 55%, but we earn more money than when we back in the days had a fill rate of almost 80. So I think you can do a lot with less if you focus on quality and user experience.
Thank you, Anik. When we decide on which kind of demand partners we want to work with, it's of course always a bit tricky to understand as to who is adding unique demand, who is not. And also, when we run the A/B tests on a publisher's perspective, if we do make the decision to cut out some partners, we see the immediate negative impact from it. If we add additional ones, even if we already know they don't have any unique demand, they are just reselling other SSPs inventory, they don't even have a DSP relationship, we see a positive impact from that. And I think that makes it very difficult for the majority of publishers within the market to make these decisions, because the moment they do, if we, let's say, we go from an advertising stack of 20 partners to 5 partners, there's an immediate revenue drop visible, especially on the US market. It's a bit less on the European one, where pre-bid and SSPs have less dominance, let's say. But especially on the US market, there's an immediate drop of 10, 15, 20% visible from that. And that then, of course, makes it very difficult internally, also with the management team, to convince them, hey, this is actually going to recover over time. With all of the seasonality that is going on as well, it is difficult to do quarter-over-quarter analysis. We all know that there's no way we could trust those numbers with everything that is changing. So Kara or Anik, like from your perspective, if a publisher would want to make those decisions of removing some of these kind of pure reseller accounts, not even just going down to like 5 or so, but just removing like the reseller accounts, how do you consider like what is like a good way to communicate that internally and show, hey, this is the right thing to do, and it is not going to hurt us long-term revenue-wise?
Yeah, I can chip in there, I think. I mean, and don't get me wrong, when we shut off SSPs, we also lost money at first. But we, I think, just made the bold move of doing anyways, because we strongly believed you would get more quality back, a better sense of the demand side of the business. And in the end, that would pay off in, combining that with better formats into higher CPMs, which in the end also brings you more revenue. So I think this may be also trying to convince the internal boards of going for quality and long term and not focusing on the short term. And I can imagine a drop of -15. Yeah, no one is going to say, oh, let's go for it straight away. But if you have a good quality plan on the side, I would just try to go for it. And I think also analysis comes in here, because if we, for example, compare all the advertisers buying from the different SSPs, you also see quite some overlap in the top 20 of the big SSPs, for example. You could also say, okay, we're going to go for a more active sales approach towards that top 20 and make sure they're going to buy through one path we advise them on.
Thank you, Anik. Kara, if we look at like requests coming in from a publisher that has a relatively clean setup, I don't know, let's say they work with like 8 partners, which would be like a normal average size advertising stack, and they don't work with resellers. And we compare this advertising stack to another one, which is working with 20 partners, bunch of resellers in there. Of course, there's now a bigger fair share portion available to all of the SSPs because there's less competition. But from your perspective, what is happening from the SSP side and the DSP side with that inventory and demand? Are they reacting positively to it? How much more value in terms of like bid density or otherwise do you think can be gained from that side?
Yeah, I think it's definitely less about whether it's a reseller or where the demand is coming from. But at the core, I think if we can prioritize partnerships with vendors, whether that definition changes based on who you're talking to, who are transparent with their tech and have similar sustainability goals and commitments in place, we're off to a good start. It could be supporting, new initiatives that the IAB and folks are pushing out to help streamline and understand an impressions path more effectively. But it could also just be asking questions and holding suppliers and demand accountable for how they're viewing sustainability and what are they doing to reduce their carbon footprints. Really start at the carbon as part of the success and performance metrics when looking under the hood, whether to see if what pockets of supply are monetizing by best and who are monetizing those, and what are they doing on their side to hold everybody accountable within the entire pathway. I think that's kind of the crux of how we viewed it at GumGum, that we are kind of looking at all of our partnerships holistically and making sure that they have a plan in place. Now, maybe that plan is different based on who you're talking to, especially because standardization is not huge on this yet. But as long as they're making some active, conscious efforts toward it, I think in this beginning stages, that really can say a lot.
Thank you. If we look on the measurement side and as to how the carbon emissions are basically measured and calculated, there's always like as a publisher the question. So we have the scenario where Scope 3 is looking at the ads.txt records, which caused some frustrations on the publishing side. I don't mean to call them out or anything about it, just like, hearing that feedback from the publishers. So Caroline, like from your perspective, what do you think is right now the best state? Is it the ads.txt analysis, which is fine, it is what is available and it is what we can do? And then from your perspective, what do you think is like where does the industry have to move so that we can actually get like an accurate reading on those emissions, keeping in mind that especially the mid-sized and smaller publishers do not have the ability to have everything in-house, in the sense of that they are able to utilize the same demand seeds for all types of monetization, be it native recommendations, the video player, and the display units on the page. They usually work with multiple partners and therefore have multiple records on the page, but they are not actually duplicating the inventory, as those are unique depending on the different locations the advertisements run. So from your perspective, what do you think, or what do you see in the market happening that this measurement is improving? Oh, sorry, we are not hearing you at the moment.
Can we hear me now?
Yeah, thank you.
Beautiful. I will say that it's super important that we utilize data as we're measuring publishers in their emissions. And right now there's a big issue out there in that publishers are being graded by third parties in a way that is quite meaningless, and perhaps like just looking at ads at text files, which is something that we're talking about. And you had made a mention that maybe there's only 8 lines and that's like the standard, but I frankly think that publishers get a little bit lazy with their ads and text files, and they might have a massive amount of lines in there. And there's companies out there that are grading these publishers based off of that and saying, oh, wow, look at all these ads and text files. This is like not a clean publisher, essentially. And so I think it's really important that we rely and utilize data in a way that it's able to be looked at as apples to apples, essentially, when we talk about like mapping carbon emissions up to our like GSG emissions. And so I think it's really important that publishers start to lean in and start to, again, understand where they sit and start to measure and understand basically just how they can reduce in ways of, as far as, it could be geographically, device type, et cetera, of how they want to target. And yeah, I think it's important to understand that companies are looking at these sorts of things and putting grades in place that are not necessarily accurate.
Thank you. So from a publisher's perspective, if putting it in a different way, so if you're looking at it from a publisher's perspective and we are cutting out demand partners, and let's say we're not even cutting them out always, we apply some kind of traffic shaping, what is occurring that we don't see any effects from that happening at all. Like the best we can measure is it doesn't affect our revenue. Like we were so good at deciding what not to send that it doesn't have any effect on the revenue numbers. But it's pretty much impossible to see any kind of positive effects from that immediately in a measurable way. And it is the same thing when we are reducing the amount of partners we are working with. It is the same thing if we are reducing the number of reseller lines or overall ads.txt records we have on the page. It is very, very difficult to basically be impossible to measure as to does it have a positive effect or not. If anything, we can see if we removed a little bit too much or if we cut a little bit too much traffic, but it has a negative impact. So there is this difficulty overall within the market in terms of measuring it. If we are cutting something and if we are reducing partnerships or if we are reducing reseller lines, the best case is nothing. We don't see any changes in the data in most cases. And the worst case is we actually see negative impact from having removed something that was quite important or not giving it enough time to understand is it recovering or not. It is very difficult with the fluctuations. For a publisher, if we already have 10 bidders in our stack and we add an additional one on top, if this new one we're adding on top is an average one, and average ones, I mean SSPs, which pretty much all of us know and are aware of. So basically like the tier 2 layer. What we can notice as a change within the overall revenue, be it on the session level or CPM level, is around like a 1.5 to 2% increase. Now this 1.5 to 2% increase is nothing compared to seasonality, even going from one day to the next day. So that means overall it is very difficult. Now, what we have observed, and I kind of want to go into detail there a bit, Kara, is that when a publisher does make those decisions to either reduce partners or to basically qualify the traffic a bit is that the actual auction size that is happening within the SSP is increasing. So while it is barely possible to say if the revenue is increasing, but what we do see is changing is the average number of DSPs or bidders within the auction on the SSP side. What is like kind of your perspective on that? Have you noticed something similar?
Yeah, I definitely think that we do notice something similar. I think it's imperative for publishers to understand that adding one SSP partner like that means that you may be adding 10 to 20 downstream partners. You're also trusting that the SSP is putting forth the most direct path and putting that into their own algorithms. And that may be the case and that may not be the case. So it could be even more than that. I also think that there could be a benefit. And I don't necessarily think that cutting out and doing traffic shaping means that the best case scenario is no change. I think SPO is really, really big right now, and it should be. And those are active, conscious decisions of demand choosing the most efficient and direct pathways. And I think that sustainability should be part of that conversation. So hopefully, if you start to tighten up and button up a little bit, that downstream could actually mean that you're seeing better performance metrics, better win rates, right? Better bid rates from these demand partners that are going to then want to purchase your inventory more and more and direct more of their demand downstream to you. So I think there's two sides of that coin for sure. And again, I think that's what goes back to like data sharing and transparency and opening kind of both sides, so that publishers have that insight into when I add one partner, where does that mean all of my traffic really is going? It's a good question that they should hopefully be asking.
Thank you. It's definitely something we're observing from the SSP's perspective is that when, let's say we have like a starting point of no shaping at all of the traffic or barely any shaping of the traffic, and then starting to implement some shaping, that yes, there are QPS limits, and yes, there's immediate impact of increased revenue from where those QPS limits exists. But even with those partners where those limits do not exist, over time, over the course of 1 to 2 weeks, we can see that more and more revenue from that partner is actually flowing through these pipes as the demand side is realizing, okay, actually this path seems to be more efficient. I seem to be able to spend more money, get the same number of conversions or better ones, while receiving way less requests from that partner. So that is definitely something we're observing as well. The difficult part is, of course, from a publisher's perspective, they are not able to observe that because their scale is quite small. A DSP is not really going to act on a publisher's level if they are mid or small size. Or very big publishers, maybe to some degree, but even then, quite limited. Thank you. Now, traffic shaping overall itself, it is like one kind of way of addressing the overall carbon emissions, the efficiency, and so on. But it is more like a walk around as to what is happening overall. It is not the actual solution, and it's not the actual thing we would need to really fix those things going on. Now, the issue, of course, of fixing the actual underlying problem is that there is no motivation to do so for the publisher, or at least for the medium and small-sized ones, as they see the negative impact on revenue. But when traffic shaping comes in, and it is able to help to some degree, and is able to clean up some parts of it, and it might provide the indication, hey, if I clean up more, I might have more trust into actually this is like, it's not good to have so many partners. It's not good to have so many paths. It's not good to call the same SSP, the same seed for 3 or 4 different paths on my end. Open bidding, Amazon, private server, client side, and maybe 1 or 2 licensed RTB integrations. So some publishers really, they have a small .txt file, but they have 5 paths to the same SSP for the same seed, which of course is inflating the inventory as well and goes completely unseen on the carbon measurement front. And it is working for them. It is driving more revenue, unfortunately, at the moment. But the long-term effect is that as the traffic is increasing, what the SSPs are seeing and what the DSPs are seeing is that the amount of revenue they can generate per request received is heavily dropping. And with that number dropping, they deprioritize that partner. And step by step, slowly over time, the demand is basically, or the focus is put on other publishers, where it is more clean, where the revenue per incoming request is higher. That is how I personally put it, from like an understanding perspective on a publisher side as to why it can make sense and why it can do something. But overall, of course, it is very difficult to put an exact number on it as to what are the effects. Now, traffic shaping overall, given that it is also a walk around and not like a complete solution requires complete redesign of how stuff is traded within the industry, or incentives also given from DSPs around that, and transparency within the data of duplication and non-duplication. But traffic shaping also has side effects that negatively affect other parts of the industry. On one side, it is helping a lot. On the other side, it is causing some limitations. So if we look at it from the demand perspective, we are receiving a lot of requests for the high value users, for which we have good campaigns available. But then actually for the mid to lower buckets, where it's still good supply. It's not like bad. It's not just bot traffic. But for those, we actually receive very little. So on one side, it's a good market economics of creating a lot of pressure within, for the, let's say, top 20, 30, 40% of the user base. But then all of the other user base is staying, pretty much like not monetized to the fullest extent, as the entire amount of requests actually arriving at the DSP is a lot lower. Of course, there are SSPs which will always send those requests to the DSPs as long as they can within the QPS limits, even for those lower requests. But in the majority of cases, those are being cut. And then the other side is, with the entire move we have to the cookie-free environment, this inventory right now is like completely underperforming and compared to the cookie inventory. So when we compare these two things, we have another portion of inventory where we, on the publishing side and on the advertising side, and the entire industry, we need to be able to implement these new technologies and alternatives. But at the same time, the market, with the request flooding, traffic shaping as like short-term or long-term solution, depending on how things will go, is actually handicapping the innovation, I would say. So would any of, I don't know for whom this question is really good, like does any one of you have like an opinion on that?
Just processing your comment, Niels.
It was a lot of information, sorry.
And it was a lot of information, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think I'm also coming back to the story of making more from less. And I think also these less maybe targeted high value audiences can still create extra value down the chain. But it is definitely something I think we as a publisher struggle with. Also, for example, the no consent inventory we have, it's not big currently in the Netherlands and Belgium because we don't have that much authority pushing us into very strict walls. But yeah, I mean, it's something we struggle with. Should we market it or not? And which price should we market it, or should we not market it at all? So I think it's a difficult one. And being a DPG, I think we're in a lucky position that we still have a lot of high quality inventory we can push. And we also have a solid first party strategy with hard logins, but that's only for the lucky few, right? So I think that's a market challenge there. And how to progress to that new state, also especially after the cookie really died, because that's going to happen for sure this year, and how we're going to deal with that. But I think it's also more a market responsibility maybe, and also the publisher stepping up more and also going into dialogue more with the SSP and the DSP, because I think you mentioned it in the beginning, Carolyn, like maybe the publisher has been a bit lazy and just wants the tech always to solve it. And I think that's definitely true. So I think it's a combination of all of that. And don't forget the buyer, of course, are there, and the user, to make sure that we come up with new alternatives and we can make also the less valuable impression worthwhile. Maybe due to high brand suitability, brand safety, very high performing ad. I don't know, but there have to be many options.
I think it also impacts the importance of like diversifying your demand and making sure that you have a well-rounded solution with the partners that you're working for. Yes, you want to do direct partnerships. You want to do all of those, status quo checks, but you also want to make sure that they're not just relying on campaigns and buyers that require that level of granularity and require understanding who the user is, right? At GumGum, we do contextual and attention targeting. We don't necessarily need to know who the user is or care if there's a cookie or not. So I think there's other partnerships and other companies like GumGum that you can also leverage and lean on that, you know, can still use that supply, because it is still good supply. It's not bad supply. It's just maybe not as granular as you may need it, but it still, you know, is the key demographic that you're looking to hit.
Thank you. Carolyn, anything from you on this topic?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's also worth shouting out our partnership with Assertive Yield, which has allowed our publishers to implement traffic shaping within Sadara's platform. And by doing this, it gives publishers the opportunity to, you know, again, do traffic shaping and safeguard from their revenue streams, which is something that we discussed before. And publishers are given like a really meaningful solution for both measuring and, again, reducing their emissions, and to give like transparent updates to those who are asking for it. And so I think there's a lot of fear as far as like what the reprimands would be for providing such transparency, but there's also it's way more rewarding. And I think that's worth noting, is that there's traffic shaping capabilities out there that are not going to provide implications or negative impacts on your business.
Thank you. We have a question from Stan. Currently, there's pretty much no incentive for publishers to do DPO, demand path optimization, and the ones that do have a hard time measuring the differences. So do we expect there to be any kind of change within the industry that would allow measuring the increase in efficiency? I think, Caroline, you basically just answered one side of it, and that is, of course, looking at the carbon emissions and how those are changing. On the other perspective, Cara, from your side, do you feel like at some point, if a publisher would send through, let's say, like the extension part of the RTB protocol, information as to if the request was traffic shaped or not, or creating curation packages, that SSPs would take that information into account?
Yeah, I definitely think that would be beneficial and help. I also think that over time, publishers that may not be doing DPO may get not forced into it, but may have to, because if SSPs are doing it on our side and we're looking at our carbon emissions and we're looking at where do we cut costs and where is the demand now flowing to, it may organically then need to be a publisher's problem as more SSPs are potentially throttling their traffic or not working with all of their different pathways that they're offering. I think maybe there might be a power shift that happens there naturally if that isn't taken into consideration. And I think things that you're saying there and different things that can get passed can only help further, again, that transparency and information sharing, so we can both make those decisions accordingly.
Yeah, and I maybe don't really agree with there's no incentive for a publisher to do DPO. Yeah, maybe not always from the revenue perspective, but you can be smart with that. But you can also do small things, and I think we shouldn't forget the publisher is at the start of the value chain, right? So there's definitely a responsibility, I would say, for every publisher to be involved on this topic and not let the demand and only the tech side get away with it, because we do have a responsibility here. And you can also do small things. I mean, like easy things like lazy load your page, your ad, make sure you always have a bid floor in place, etc., etc. Those are small things which I don't think necessarily will negatively impact your revenue. But I mean, why send out an ad request for a placement with a viewability of 20%? It doesn't make sense. So maybe better update your quality perspective and go for, again, make every ad request count in that matter. And I think then I have the strong belief, if you're mid-size, small or big, then you will also be able to monetize your inventory better.
Mm-hmm. To put a bow on everything that you both just said, also, I think it's important to note that measurement standards and proper framework and around standardization is going to be coming from GARM in a couple of months. And it's going to be, I think a bit of an awakening for everybody. And so more and more brands and agencies are going to start leaning in and demanding such transparencies from all of their suppliers, which will impact everybody within the supply chain. And so I think that's something to definitely worth discussing, and that these standard, Kara, you mentioned earlier that there's no like hard set on standardization just yet, but it is certainly coming. And I think it's important to get ahead of the curve and start to really understand like how your business is operating.
Thank you all. Very good answers to this topic. Then we have a question from Lazar. Should a change happen on the ad server level? Basically, the ad server deciding whether there should be an auction run programmatically, open auction-wise, if there is a sponsorship, standard line item, or something where we pretty much know, okay, open market is not going to participate anyway, even if I would be bidding. Anik, maybe that is a good question for you.
Yeah, it's a great question. This is exactly something we currently are dealing with because, we try to get our emissions measurements in as well. And what we have, when we have a fixed takeover on one of our biggest news sites, we also keep on sending out ad requests in the back, but it doesn't make sense at all because the takeover is there for the whole day and there will be no opportunity for programmatic to chip in. But yeah, I have to be honest with you, we were not able to solve it yet with our ad server partner, which is Microsoft, just for your information. And we are still looking into ways to get that fixed because the emissions are pretty high there and it's also not relevant to anyone in the chain. Great question. I don't really have the answer, but I'm pretty strong in saying there's definitely something we can solve there. If I have the answer one day, I will definitely share it, but we were not able to solve it yet.
It is a difficult topic because by the time we would know if a standard or a sponsorship line item is actually delivering, because quite often there are IVT checks and other things happening beforehand which are not known. It's not just the targeting basis, there are other things, quality measurement and other decisions that happen.
Exactly.
By the time all of this information is available, if we would only then kick off the, let's say, open auction, we would have lost a lot of time. So it is possible, of course, to say, okay, we're first going to try if we have something directly delivering, and only then we would run the other auction. But if we would do so, we would quickly lose an entire second. And while a second might sound very small, a second has
it's big.
Actual percentage differences in overall revenue if we would have such big delay, especially on all of the pages where people are quickly on it and gone again because they look at a list of articles or similar, or they were just looking for quick information and they only stay 5 to 10 seconds. There's a lot of impressions that get lost that are quite valuable to the publisher.
Yeah, true. And we even thought about maybe, putting up 2 ad servers next to each other and then giving the one the first go if there's a fix and then the rest will. But that also really doesn't make sense because that seems too complex to solve this issue. But working on it.
Thank you. Then we have one question from Abby. How granular should you go with traffic shaping? Looking at the bid level, the geo, the ad placement level, and so on. I guess this is a good question for you, Kara.
I was going to say, Niels, that seems like you. I think as granular as you can get. I mean, we expose everything that we have access to on understanding what a piece of inventory is and all of the demand. We expose every single thing to our traffic shaping partner, which happens to be Assertive Yield. And we then allow each of those to be used in the traffic decisioning so that we can make sure that we are doing it as perfectly as we can, and we're not missing out on those extra bits of requests that we still might be able to get held back or should go upstream. So we see as least of an impact as possible on the revenue side while still being able to conserve as much QPS on the flip side. So I guess.
Thank you. Yeah.
Long-winded answer, short, everything.
To add maybe a little bit more detail here, from a publisher's perspective, it would be possible to implement traffic shaping in a way where we could say, okay, if a partner did not respond for 2 times, 3 times or so, we stop sending requests. Similar thing can be done from an SSP's perspective. And this works quite well. The issue, though, is that it is very unpredictable, because if the user is navigating from one page to another one, the context is changing, and all of a sudden the partner is bidding again. Or the cookie sync wasn't done, but then on the refresh, the cookie sync was completed, and now all of a sudden the partner is bidding. But then also the frequency capping that occurs within the DSP and the distribution of the campaigns, as there's pretty much always more supply than demand in the market, is also a limiting factor, where it's totally normal for an SSP not to bid for any random number of time, and then all of a sudden they start bidding again. So that makes it very difficult from a manual perspective to do it well. It's possible to do it with like, yeah, let's cut it off after 3 times no bid, and it works. It does reduce the requests heavily. It usually comes at quite a big impact on the revenue per session, as we lose and are wrong multiple times. So the most simple way of doing it without any external solution would be really to do it based on the geo and possibly based on the placement level. However, the placement level is only relevant in regards to if it has a super low viewability. Ideally, it makes sense not to have too many partners on it, but at the same time, then the core issue is that it has the low viewability, and that is the one that should be addressed. But also, of course, the media types that are being requested and the creative sizes that are requested. When from a publisher's perspective, we are sending requests for pretty much any creative size that is available, for some SSPs that will result in multiple auctions. Not most of them, it will be just one, but for some of them it will result in multiple auctions, and it is a huge inflation of what is going on there. And then this can also have a bigger impact on the traffic shaping that is occurring from the SSP as they decide to pick like specific creative sizes. Now, the SSP is usually good at deciding which ones to actually run an auction for and which ones to throw out. Similar on the DSP side. But overall, from a publisher's perspective, it's a lot more clean if we actually only request what we need and not other formats which are either very unlikely to winning or which have actually no possibility of winning because of possible wrong configuration otherwise. Yeah, so I don't want to do here any self-plug or anything. So if I would do it internally without much resources, I would probably implement something where I would stop sending requests after a partner has not bid for multiple times, and I would exclude a few important partners from that, meaning the ones that have the highest win rates and bid rates overall, as to not to hurt the inventory too much when the system was wrong. Ideally, of course, it's machine learning system that can understand the patterns, that can understand the percentiles and quantiles as to how likely it is for a partner to bid, given, oh, we just went from minute 29 to minute 30, probably frequency cap A resetted, or usually demand goes up from this partner at that point in time. But this is like, as from a human or pure algorithm perspective, that is not machine trained, very difficult to do. And then we have another question from Rufcham Maika. I'm guessing it's a nickname. How important is it for publishers to start implementing traffic shaping on their end so they can control how demand partners interact with their supply? So how important is it that publishers take control of traffic shaping themselves versus letting the SSPs, DSPs otherwise manage it?
Yeah, I think that's one for me, right? Makes sense. Yeah, I think I already hinted towards that in another answer. I think it's definitely important that publishers start to claim more responsibility there and just don't let it end up with the tag, oh, we just use the tag and that's working for us, because I don't think that's the way to behave. And for me, it's actually maybe more, not even in the technical side of things, but maybe also in finding the better interaction with your demand partner. Just have a conversation and find out what their needs are, and maybe just guide them in, okay, how can I best enter into this network in the end? Because I think if we are in touch with big agencies and also large advertisers, it's sometimes pretty striking what they're looking for. And maybe they also don't really have an idea how to best enter that network that we present. So I think for me, it's maybe also more of the collaboration arena of things and not always just the tech side of everything. Because if you understand, and I get it, I mean, it's not really possible to have a strong relationship with everyone in market, but I think if you go for the top 20 and try to understand them better, And maybe also try to grasp the trend of, okay, which agency and which demand partner is working with SSP. You can also go for more focus there, right? Set up specific PMPs, maybe in a certain SSP for a certain buyer only, and go for clean plots there. Because that also means that that buyer, on the other hand, can then say, okay, I'm just going to buy through this route and I'm going to cancel out all the rest. And that in the end also, I think, boils down to less waste and noise.
I think over time too, that information can be really valuable of what is consistently getting held back and is not getting sent, and can help inform business decisions on where should we put our resources, what type of inventory should we be going after, what user base do our demand partners typically like and like to see, and what mix is there. You can kind of help make some business decisions of where to put your dollars.
Yeah, and I mean, from a sustainability perspective, it's obviously very important. Just an example, header bidding has significant emissions impact. And so overall, it's just less bids, less energies equals less carbon. And I think that's something that we have to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think that's maybe not top of the game yet, especially if I look at the European market. I think we're a bit behind on the publisher side, but also the demand side, maybe with respect to getting that carbon emission responsibility in a bit more. So I think there's definitely quite some work to do there yet.
I would add on top of this that on the publisher side, if we can do it well, we can be more efficient. Because when we put ourselves in the shoes of an SSP, and the important thing we are looking at is reducing requests without losing, basically winning impressions. But when the average SSP is only winning 2.5% of the time, in many cases even less than that, but is very low and limited information available to make these decisions. So the amount of information the SSP has on every single domain or even seat ID in terms of number of impressions that actually want to understand what they have to optimize against losing when they cut requests is quite limited. And it is not a full picture. So at the same time, on the SSP side, of course, it has to be very efficient to make these predictions. So it has to be very fast, happen within less than a millisecond pretty much. And within this time, the algorithm, the machine learning that performs and makes those decisions can't be huge, because that becomes too expensive. But at the same time means that on a SSP perspective, I'm not able to look at a medium-sized publisher uniquely or independently, or on a placement ID that has like small amounts of traffic. Of course, the biggest partners of the SSP, they within that model get basically treated uniquely and independently. But the mid-sized, smaller publishers are not really falling under that. So for mid-sized and smaller publishers, but also bigger ones, there is the unique opportunity on the publisher end that there's just so much more data available, including also information as to what was losing, which the SSP does not have access to. So the amount that can actually be cut in wasteful traffic can be higher, but it isn't always, because it's a different layer. When we're on the publisher side, we decide on, do we send a request to an SSP partner? However, when we're on the SSP side, we make the decision, do we send it to a DSP? So that is one layer deeper in. It's a different decisioning process. There are different dynamics happening. Specific DSPs have very different campaigns, but from a publisher's perspective, if we have 5 SSPs all connected to the same DSPs, it's more or less the same. So on one hand, we have more data, but on the other hand, we also have less data because we don't understand underneath what is happening on the pretty much between the SSP and the DSP. So it can be very helpful to do it on the publisher end, as a lot of traffic can already be cut out, but it is important to be careful that we are not cutting out requests that are actually valuable. And when using less sophisticated methods, I would recommend to always keep some pipes open, because they will be wrong in cases. Even sophisticated ones are wrong. There is no way to only cut without being wrong unless we apply pure country filters.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, then there was one last question. do we believe that we will see that we will see SSPs asking publishers to implement DPO on the client side or pre-bid server side instead of doing traffic shaping and only cutting the costs in half? So I guess the question here is, do SSPs want publishers to traffic shape or not?
Tell
I
me,
think that's going to
Cara.
be an answer you're going to get varying depending on who you ask. I can tell you from GumGum's side, I mean, we know that it's a big, if you're looking at sustainability and emissions, right, a big chunk of that is coming from the requests that we're listening to from publishers. So while we're able to traffic shape what we're actually sending to the DSP partners, there's still that open funnel that we're just receiving everything. And it's hard to say whether that is the SSP's responsibility to figure out how to cut off that funnel, or if it should come from the publisher and they do it across all of their SSP and demand partners themselves. Nobody's really been doing that in practice, so I think it's hard to say which way is the correct way, but I definitely do think the way that the industry is trending, that will be a natural occurrence that will likely start to happen. Whether it's us, an SSP actually saying that that's what they want, or that's just the way that publishers may interpret their own sustainability and their own emission scoring.
Thank you. There's definitely already the case where SSPs are asking publishers with a lot of international traffic to completely shut off certain countries. That is happening, and that is, of course, something that is relatively easy to do. As things evolve, it might become more. But yeah, thank you for the details on that, Cara. So as we're approaching the end of the discussion, I really want to thank all three of you, Cara, Caroline, and Anik, for joining me on this topic and going into the depths of it. And also to all of the people listening in, thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope the entire session was interesting, that you could learn a lot new stuff about the inner workings and as to what are the different things that are playing against each other within improving the efficiencies and reducing the carbon emissions within this industry. And I hope that it also raised some questions for you as to how you see this entire topic, the challenges, the good sides, the bad sides, and so on. Also, thank you for your questions. So I would like to remind that the entire basically panel and discussion is or was recorded. So if you want, feel free to share it with colleagues and so on afterwards. Also, I understand and realize that some parts we went quite deep. So feel free, if you got curious, to rewatch those parts. And yeah, then I just wanted to encourage you to follow GumGum, Sidara, DPG, as the field, and so on. And we thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.